In this video, we'll be looking at the aps-c lenses to help circumvent that crop when shooting 4K 60p on the Sony A7 IV. Now, pretty much any lenses will work great on the Sony A7 IV, but if you want that ultra-wide look perspective, something that's wider than a 16mm full frame, then we actually have to look at the aps-c side of things to go beyond that. And actually, we have a recommendation that will give you a 13.5mm full frame equivalent look. And we'll even toss in some mid-range zoom lens that's akin to the popular 24-70. Now, I'm no stranger to shooting crop 4K 60p. In fact, I've done it way before the Sony A7 IV even came out. That's right, I did it before it was even cool. On the flagship Sony A1. This is the best hybrid camera money can buy. It can do full frame 4K 60p and 120p, but the reason why I shoot a lot of 4K 60p crop is because the lenses are generally lighter, smaller, and less expensive, yet I'm still pulling amazing results. And thank you Samsung for sponsoring a portion of this video. So the first lens that we have on the list is the Laowa 9mm f2.8 for about $500. This is possibly the widest lens in our list, giving us roughly a 13.5mm full frame equivalent. Now the only downside to this is that it's a manual only focus lens. However, Laowa is best touted for their zero distortion in their ultra wide angle lenses. So for real estate videos, this will be perfect for that. Plenty wide and the quality is excellent. It's uber tiny, uber lightweight, and it can be balanced on a small gimbal like the Zhiyun Crane M3. Again, it's manual focus only, so make use of the focus peaking or use a monitor if possible. Now, unfortunately, you cannot use the new focus mapping feature on the Sony A7 IV with this lens because this lens has no electronic contacts whatsoever. Boo! The next lens that we have on the list is the Sony 10-18 f4 for about $900. Now, despite this being an aps-c lens, it's a well-known secret that can be used in full frame mode. The trick is to zoom in until the vignetting is gone, so you can use this in 4K 24 or 4K 30p in full frame mode if you want to vlog with it. And even when you throw this into 4K 60, the widest end will give you roughly a 15mm full frame equivalent look. While it's not as small and light as the Laowa, it's still lightweight and compact overall, and of course it has the autofocusing capability. It won't strain you when you vlog, and you can most certainly use it on a small gimbal, such as again, the Crane M3. Now the only downside to this lens is that it's an f4, so luckily we have the Tamron 11-20mm f2.8 for about $830. Now unfortunately, this lens cannot be used in full frame mode, but the thing that it's got going for it is that compared to the other two lenses, the Tamron has autofocus and it's an f2.8. On the widest end, it's going to give you a 16.5mm full frame equivalent look, which is still plenty wide enough, and you can still use it on a small gimbal. By the way, shout out to my new NYC friends Johnny and Jamie for being my lovely models. They run a YouTube channel on street and techwear fashion. If you're interested, I'll drop a link to their channel in the description box below. Now, out of the three lenses I just recommend, only the Sony has built-in lens stabilization, which I argue is not going to be a huge deal because generally full-frame Sony bodies have built-in in-body image stabilization to compensate for those handheld shakes. Now, we have versatile zoom lens recommendations coming up. Don't miss out on that. These are going to be our 24-70 equivalents, but in the shape of aps-c lenses. But before that, thank you Samsung for sponsoring a portion of this video. This is the Samsung M7 32-inch 4K Smart TV monitor combo. So it's pretty much an external monitor with smart TV capabilities for just $400. And it goes beyond that too. The M7 supports wireless screen mirroring for both Android and Apple devices, so it's really nice to cast our MacBook screens onto this when Vivi and I have our daily meetings. And while I can use this as a secondary display via AirPlay for my M1 Max MacBook, it's better with the USB-C connection or HDMI because it can output the full 4K quality as opposed to just 1080p wirelessly. So for long-term productivity, use the cable, but for something short-term, just cast it to the M7, which has been my favorite thing so far. Now, we don't have this, but if you're an Office 365 user, you can just actually connect to the app from the monitor itself, connect a wireless keyboard and mouse, and you could be doing Word and PowerPoint with the M7. It's pretty nifty. The other thing I like about this monitor is its TV capabilities. It's nice to be able to use the remote to turn it on and adjust my settings rather than using the little knobby button on the bottom or the back of the monitor to finesse with the brightness and volume. But the fact that it's a TV, we're a little old school. We like to channel surf and land on a channel that so happens to be playing one of our favorite movies or TV shows as we do the more boring, mundane tasks like editing photos and organizing our files. Now, of course, we can also choose from our favorite apps like Netflix, Prime, and even Hulu. But sometimes it's just easier when something is chosen at random for us as opposed to us spending hours browsing through the entire Netflix catalog before we settle on something. Don't laugh at me, I know you do the same thing too. For more information about the Samsung M7, check out the link in the description box below. Thanks for listening, guys. Now back to the video. Now in this list, you're not going to find the Zeiss 16-70 f4 nor the Sony 18-105 f4. Now don't get me wrong, they're not bad lenses. If you already have them, go ahead and use them, especially the 18-105 right here. This has an internal power zoom, so it's going to be great for gimbals. However, it is 2022. We have quite a bit of versatile zoom lens with a constant f2.8 aperture to choose from, such as the Sony 16-55 f2.8G for roughly $1,400. So this lens here is going to give us the closest equivalent of a full-frame 24-70mm lens, but at half the size. However, out of the three lenses in this category, it is the most expensive. But in my comparison test, the Sony does have overall better sharpness and better control over distortion and chromatic aberration. Especially when it comes to video, we don't have the luxury of correcting some of these in post like we can for photos in Lightroom. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't have lens stabilization, but again, it's probably not a big deal when it comes to using it with the Sony A7 IV and the other full-frame Sony bodies. Remember, they have in-body image stabilization. In fact, the active stabilization on the more recent full-frame Sony bodies will work the best with Sony's own lenses as opposed to using it with a third-party lens. So if you need that extra stabilization, especially when you're shooting at 55mm handheld, the active stabilization will come in clutch. Now, this lens will fly on the Crane M3, but I won't zoom with it though. When I do use this lens on that gimbal, I'll keep it strictly at 16mm. I would recommend a bigger gimbal like the Zhiyun Weebill or the DJI RS2 if you want that flexibility of zooming with this lens. Moving on, we have the Tamron 17-70mm f2.8 for about $800, and this is probably the chunkiest boy of the three in this category because one, it has a 70mm reach, and two, it actually has lens stabilization. This lens here gives us the closest full frame equivalent of a 24-105. Well, more like a 25.5-105, but this reach here is incredibly handy, and that makes it quite possibly the most versatile out of the three. I would say this is extremely great for handheld videos because of the girth and even monopod and tripods for event shoots such as weddings. But for gimbals, you really want to use one that can support the front heaviness of this lens. I personally used it on the DJI RS2 before and it worked great. And I've gotten a lot of questions asking me this, but I'm sorry, no, this will not work on the Crane M3. Now, does the lens stabilization help with the stabilization more? Well, supposedly, but I honestly can't tell. It looks just as good as hand-holding the Sony 16-55, and both of these shots here are with active stabilization turned on. Before we move on to the last lens, I just want to let you know I don't have any long telephoto lenses in this list just because I view anything beyond full frame 24mm, you can actually get an actual full frame version of those lenses. If you need a close look with the 4K 60p, it is incredibly easy. However, if you need that ultra wide look, it is harder, and that's why we need to find these types of lenses in the realms of aps-c. And so finally, the one versatile f2.8 zoom lens that I can highly recommend to combat that 4K 60p crop for the Sony A7 IV is the Sigma 18-50 f2.8. It's compact, it's tiny, it's f2.8 throughout, and it's only $549. This is the dream lens. Sure, it's not as wide as the Sony, and it doesn't have quite the reach like the Tamron, but if we consider the full frame equivalent of this lens is a 27-75mm, it's still a standard mid-range zoom lens. Now, the chromatic aberration on this lens is quite apparent at times, especially in video, so do make a mental note of that. But when you hit it right at the sweet spot, oh, it is a sharp lens. In fact, we shot a majority of our review on the Tamron 35-150mm with this tiny Sigma lens. And I've actually done a whole review on the Sigma last month. You guys should totally go check it out because I went pretty in depth. But in that video, I used this lens with the flagship Sony A1 in 4K 60p, and it worked phenomenally. And I have no doubt it will be the same with the Sony A7 IV. So let me know in the comments down below, how are you personally dealing with the 4K 60p crop on the Sony A7 IV? Does it bother you? Does it not bother you? Let me know in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video, you already know what to do. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.